Welcome to the Everyday Citizens Tactical Podcast, Episode 20, Communications and Conversations. My name is Jeremy and I will be your host. Today I'm joined by Alex, better known as Mojave Repeater. Alex is a Marine Corps veteran who served as a field radio operator who now strives to push the culture and education of communications to the civilian side of the house. So, sit back, get your note-taking gear, and enjoy.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours.
Alright guys, welcome back to the podcast, and Alex, welcome.
Thank you.
We got this podcast is going to be another one over comms, guys, and I have a few things listed to talk about. But first, Alex, if you want to go ahead and talk about who you are and what Mojave Repeater is, and kind of give everybody a little background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a communications guy in the Marine Corps. Served out here in 29 Palms with 3rd Battalion, 11th Marines, and while I was kind of getting ready to wrap up my active duty career, if you want to call it that, not much of a career, I served 4 years. But as I was getting ready to wrap up, I basically decided that I wanted to start a business. In my opinion, two of the most American things that you could do are serve your country and start a business. So I built it around really the communication skills that I built while I was in the Marine Corps. And we started by launching a flagship product, the Lunchbox Repeater, which is a basic analog simplex repeater, designed to operate with Baofeng radios or similar. And it's really just taken off from there. I've kind of grown into training courses, radio resales, supporting consumers, commercial businesses, law enforcement, military, and stuff like that. So it's kind of surprised me, and I'm just here for the ride.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you were when I started diving into my kind of comms journey on the civilian side, there were two videos that I watched first that made me go, all right, it's time to upgrade my comms from Baofengs. And the first one was a video that Isaac did from TRX Arms, and then on the side, on the suggestion feed, was yours. I think it was the intro to like upgraded comms or something along those lines. You talked about a series of like DMR and P25 radios, and then that kind of just all snowballed from there. So glad to have you on here for sure.
Definitely, thank you.
I guess I kind of want to dive into what Mojave Repeater is a little bit more, because you guys have some really great YouTube videos, but you guys don't have a ton out. So I kind of want to give you guys that little promotion a little bit. Where did the idea of classes come from versus you guys coming out with the Lunchbox?
Yeah, so, I built, I learned a lot of really valuable skills and knowledge from the Marine Corps that I think, I was personally interested in my own preparedness, post Marine Corps and learning about radios and stuff like that. What I could do and how I could apply those skills to the civilian world. And really just the courses kind of grew out of that because I felt like, I could speak to it relatively intelligently and, share the things that I learned while I was on active duty with a wider audience. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to be able to package that and present it to, the civilian population in a way that can help them be more prepared for themselves, their team, whoever that may be, and their families.
Awesome. Obviously comms is kind of something that's a lot newer to the civilian side as far as interest in gear and all that kind of stuff. So a comms class is even still newer in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. So what kind of stuff can guys expect to learn at your class? What are you guys trying to, I guess, what are the main objectives of the class? What should guys leave knowing?
Yeah. So, you can learn about radio principles, RF fundamentals, RF theory. You can learn that stuff in your own research and things like that. I do teach it up front in the class. The first half of the class on day one is going to be really all science, right? All the scientific principles of radio waves, how they propagate, and stuff like that. Now, the key value proposition, I think, in the class is the planning aspect. So that's one of the things that I took away from the Marines that I think, and kind of adapted really for a civilian mindset, is how to plan to employ your equipment effectively. Because really, if you just have your Baofeng radio and that's where it ends, then that's not really being effective for you, and you're not being effective for others. Mm-hmm. So I try to really drive home this planning aspect of things to be able to have an effective plan and know how to employ your equipment properly. And then we do that in the practical application on day two. With a team of like-minded individuals, mm-hmm. you're able to build your plan together as a team and then employ it on the second day, out in a field environment. Mm-hmm. So that's really what you can expect to learn from the class. That's the whole concept of it.
So with 311, you talk about with the class, employing equipment, comms plans, and all of that. Were you with FOs? Were you on the gun line? Where was the bulk of your time in the field spent?
So I was with headquarters. I was okay. S6. Mm-hmm. And so basically, the primary, the whole thing, my whole job was really planning for communications, and then with the gear at our disposal, and the personnel at our disposal, implementing all of that to support the battalion's objectives. Mm-hmm. And so that goes down to, the battery level or the company level for those who are more familiar from an infantry background. Mm-hmm. Being able to provide them with, number one, the communications pathways to be able to communicate with us, mm-hmm. and then resource them with any equipment that they may need. So, with a high demand for communications and artillery, we were constantly at work, in the field, out of the field, doing stuff all the time with comm gear.
Yeah, I was with headquarters for my unit as well, which was a logistics regiment. I got to work with Artie once when I did a Red Patchers exercise. But that was mm-hmm. something I talked about on the Civil Sentinel podcast when I was just on there, was how field radio operators do so much more than just operate the radios. It's like you talked about, getting that equipment to the point where it's employable with your unit regardless of its size, and supporting the overall infrastructure of comms. Mm-hmm. The RTO is such a wide role depending on where they're put.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And you mentioned, and we talked a little bit about Baofengs, and I had this listed as later, but I kind of want to bring it up now because I guess it gets us a good starter point into the handhelds conversation. Is for the civilian aspect, where do you see Baofengs fitting? Because though, mm-hmm. I've said it a lot, it's not the end goal, but there is a place for Baofengs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, in my mind, a Baofeng is an investment that you can make that you don't really have to cry over walking away from it at a later time, Mm-hmm. And even if you do upgrade, you can still hold on to that. And it's a good thing to have in your back pocket just to be able to diversify your portfolio of equipment. Mm-hmm. So where I see them fitting in is really for the starter, for the absolute beginner, to get that radio and to learn and understand how analog radio works, mm-hmm. and to push that radio to its absolute capabilities and limitations to understand, this is the amount of value that I can get out of this, but then when I upgrade, then I can actually see the improvement that I'm getting out of that new piece of gear, mm-hmm. right? So getting that radio and then actually training with it to understand really well what its capabilities and limitations are, and then move on from there. Mm-hmm. And analog really is a good foundation for learning more about radio. So it's really easy to start with something like a Baofeng. Mm-hmm. So I do recommend, there's a lot of hate for Baofengs out there. I still recommend that, if you don't know where to begin, to pick one up. And I still sell them for that reason, because I want people to be able to have access to, that gear as a beginner.
Yeah. There's two big things that I think Baofengs kind of stay relevant for. The first one being, and it's something that me and all of my local buddies have implemented, is now that we've upgraded to P25 on the Motorola side, the Baofengs still serve a purpose, as we still keep them programmed to somewhat of an extent. We do our Motorola's, and we use them as family handouts.
Yes.
So all the guys that had 1, 2, 3, 4 more Baofengs, now we just mass program them, and now they're family handouts. If you can give one to your wife and you say, this is for you to keep all the time. You may not want to invest a $400 or $500 radio into a family member, but you can give them something basic like an analog, because they're not worried about the comm security side of it and the tactical performance and all that. They just need something basic.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, bottom line is having that is better than not having it.
Absolutely.
But then also, even to take that one step further, right? Having that and then having the resources, the skills and knowledge to use it effectively is going to be better for you.
Sure. And then the second application to that, and it's not something I practice myself, it's something I keep telling myself I'm going to do, is that if you're an individual who preps for more EMP style scenarios, putting a bunch of Baofangs in a fairway bag or box is a really good way to preserve the fact that you have some sort of comms if something were to ever happen without breaking the bank. Because at that point, a lot of people's radios are going to be fried, so you're not as worried about the comm security side of everything.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
The Baofangs, whether you're talking about the 82 or the 5R, super inexpensive. So you put 10 of them in a box, and you really are not that deep into it financially.
Right.
But moving along, are you a DMR or are you a P25 guy in your own personal take?
So I am neither, personally.
Okay.
I think that people get really wrapped around the axle about the different technologies that are out there. I mean, there's DMR and P25. That's only two of the very, very, very wide variety of different radio technologies that are available to us. Mm-hmm. And, I think that you can't really you're going to do, you shouldn't over index on any piece of equipment, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the capabilities. Mm-hmm. If you take an objective look at each different technology, everything has its capabilities and limitations. And you just need to really make an objective assessment about those capabilities and limitations and the situations where you can best employ them. So I have no love for any form of radio or technology. I think they're all best suited to their specific application.
That is the most unbiased thing anybody's ever said on this podcast. Which, by the way, cool. You didn't hear the intro, so this is episode number 20. So you were the big special guest for number 20.
Awesome. Hell yeah.
So, woo. Yeah, I really haven't messed with DMR much. And maybe it's on me because I haven't diversified my comms equipment or capabilities as much as I should have. I've really kind of dove in heavy to the P25 and AES side of the house, and I've been trying to get everything in line there. There's two big projects we're kind of looking into right now, which is a repeater, which I wanted to bring up repeaters as a point of conversation, and man packs. I've been talking to a lot of the guys in the Forbidden Comms chat. I've been talking to a lot of guys one-on-one about man pack platforms, because the Tech Prepper does a lot of good man pack videos. However, depending on the application that you're looking for with man packs, security could be of concern. So we're trying to design a man pack around the XTL 5000, which is a Motorola that's AES 256 capable. But the biggest thing we've run into so far, and this kind of goes for all of our comms projects, because I'm trying to implement comms the way I knew how to do it in the military without the infrastructure and equipment, is that the civilian market lacks some equipment depending on what you're trying to do. So I don't know, what's your kind of take on the civilian market as far as equipment availability goes so far? Do you think in the future we see things open up more? Or do you think we kind of ride the same line right now?
That's a great question. So I think that there's, demand signal going up for more durable, more capable equipment within the civilian market. And kind of this shift and this wave of new users is going to influence, the ham radio market a lot, right? And so, those rules are open to, I guess, changes depending on, how the FCC sees kind of the market. But, advocating for change is really going to be on us as the users to, advocate for those things that make us more prepared and stuff like that. But as of right now, the way that the market sits, the barrier to entry for like the encryption and stuff like that by the FCC is that Part 90 business license. The equipment is out there in terms of like secondhand or whatever, to be able to encrypt your radios, but they do put that active like barrier to entry there. And honestly, it's for good reason as well, because we have so many people competing for spectrum within, the RF space, and by opening that door to encryption to a wider audience, then they're kind of limiting. They're basically, people are going to use encryption and then they're going to monopolize the spectrum, right? So there's no way to prevent that. So that's really the problem. So if we can, come up with smart solutions and advocate for, smart, effective solutions with the FCC and with the ham community, then I think there may be, a good path forward for everyone, because we're all in this for everyone's, good, best safety and preparedness,
And that's one of the big things that kind of I foresee limiting the comms market for radio equipment and infrastructure is that, like you said, the spectrum is only so big. It's not like kind of like tactical gear, whereas for like from 2000 2010 it was kind of crappy, kind of like where we are in comms right now. Like if you can get some stuff, that's awesome, but the average person doesn't have the access or knowledge to do a lot without learning from a direct individual who knows a plethora, like you, comms and logistics, and a lot of those other guys. But with the limited spectrum, that might hinder the market's ability to grow, especially as things become more and more and more digitalized. Now, right. I guess the good thing with the way the radios have kind of shifted over the years is that, like, a lot of government and first responder agencies have moved away from VHF and those lower UHF bands to higher bands, the high UHF, like the 700-800 megahertz, and even past that. So I think there's some limitations to it. It can go either way. I definitely don't foresee the rules becoming more relaxed. I unfortunately see that there may become more rules or more limitations put in place. Because unfortunately, the unfortunate side of it all is that comms will be politicized at some point in time. Just like gear and firearms are, and everything else. I mean, even at this point, they say, if you're too much of a prepper, you're an extremist. So I feel like that eventually, once this becomes politicized, there will be an effort to limit it, which will be very unfortunate.
Yeah, that certainly will be, because it's, like the Second Amendment is it's our right. It's in the, it's our natural right. It's in our Constitution, but there's no right in terms of communications. I mean, we have the Fourth Amendment, which is a great place to advocate from. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. It's probably, too optimistic to hope for, any change or relaxation of the rules and stuff. But, I will say, I think the best course forward is probably to advocate, honestly, my perspective is probably changing on this, but joining, your local ham community and being the change that you want to see within the community, right? Because we've kind of identified the way things were and the way that we want things to be. So I think that, you can be anybody can be the advocate for change.
It's funny you mentioned that because I recently found a fairly active ham radio club in my area because I was looking up my local area repeaters again, and I saw they added a P25 repeater that's in construction, and apparently it's being overseen by this ham radio club. And it kind of got me thinking, I don't have enough tasks and responsibilities on a daily basis already. What's one more?
Yeah.
I've never been in. Are you in a ham radio club for your local area? I've never been in one. I don't know what they're like.
No.
No. I wonder. I'll have to hit up some of the other guys and see if they know what it's like. Do you know what it's like? What does a ham radio club do?
I think there's, it's widely varying depending on what kind of club you're a part of and the personalities that are within that club. Mm-hmm. I think that they usually have like pretty regular roundtables or meetings on repeaters and stuff like that. Events like Ham Fest and, if there's, for example, like farmers market in town out in Joshua Tree, the local ham club will go set up there sometimes and, try to recruit people and stuff like that. But I think it's really personality dependent. And really, I think a lot of people within those communities will find, maybe a little bit older than us, but are a lot like us in a lot of ways. They're mm-hmm. preparedness minded type people that are often, involved or interested in the gun community. So
where do you think it's kind of good you bring this up about the gun community is at what point in time do you think the gap started to be filled between the gun community and what we're now seeing in the development of comms? I feel like that's kind of like mm-hmm. within the past year thing that's become popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, so really like when I started the Mojave repeater thing, like I started obviously just marketing on Instagram and stuff like that. And it naturally like fell into place. Like I've only known the gun community through Instagram, and that was a familiar place for me to be. And that's where I kind of saw the value in, providing the things that, I wanted to build or sell to the community to make more capable individuals. And, the community really, just like really like that a lot, and we've seen that with all the other comm pages that have come up, that the community has taken a serious interest in this topic. And, I'm very grateful for that. Both just personally, like, I'm sure from being in the military and stuff, like comms isn't like the sexiest thing mm-hmm. in the military, right? Like we're the big freaking nerds, but, just to see the interest in that has been so rewarding. And yeah, I mean, I remember like talking to, Terminal Armament, like when we had both like very, very, very small followings, and just to see it grow has been just so incredible.
Mm-hmm. You say that, comms isn't super sexy, and in the military scheme of it, it's not. Not unless you're like a JTAG or something cool. Mm-hmm. But we just did a little field exercise recently, me and my buddies, and we implemented kind of the radio operator's role, or just a whole comms table to, the tabletop exercise. And we're actually passing traffic over radios and reports, maintain a comms log, a radio book, like the whole nine. And the guys found it super interesting because it was like this whole spectrum of stuff that they did not know. So they had to learn all of it, and it was super engaging for them. Mm-hmm. And I think it put into good perspective to them, like how important the role of radio operators, both in the field and a talk, wherever it might be, how important it really is. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll start to see more change in that. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people, both individuals, influencers, community-based groups, and it seems like a lot of people are kind of waking up to the change in communications and are taking on a bigger role with all of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of shows the overall change that the community has made. It's just outside of gun stuff and 1R1s and flat ranges and whatnot. We're diversifying and growing to a more self-sustainable, version of what the community used to be.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point. And I like what you brought up about doing the tabletop exercises. I think there's a lot of value in doing something like that, like wargaming, TDG, those types of things, and then implementing the communications, just so people can get a rep at that. They can see, what it's like and the friction that you experience, when you implement radios, but then also the value that it can provide. And then really the fact that you need to practice that. That's like it needs to be a well-practiced skill to be able to be effective,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't have a ton of like more high-powered base stations and mobile man packs and stuff like that. So what we did was, though we are all transferring over to Motorola's, and a fair amount of us on the P25 scale now, I took a bunch of Baofangs that we used to have, and I put electrical tape just on the top of the antenna, like a little square, a little box, and then I wrote like what channel or purpose that radio is supposed to be serving, as if it was its own dedicated net. So then the radio table had 3 different channels that they had to be monitoring that corresponded to different individuals, people, groups, whatever it might have been. So definitely super engaging. And that's one of the other nicer things about Baofangs. You know, it is a cheap training tool. Because I always tell people to train to a higher standard or whatever the next step might be. Okay, well, the next step, you know, we're transferring over our portables. Cool. What's the next step? All right, use of repeaters, man packs, base stations, stuff like that. We're not there yet, but let's try to mimic like we can get there. That way, once we get to that equipment, we're not starting from square one.
Right. Yeah, that's excellent.
You know, and let's dive in, I guess, to repeaters a little bit like that. I mentioned that earlier. Do you primarily, just in your own personal time, do you go off of like your local ham radio clubs, repeaters, and other repeater infrastructure, or do you prefer to kind of create your own infrastructure? Because I know you guys have the lunchbox.
Yeah, so I prefer to have, you know, my own infrastructure in place. And, you know, like that's something that I think, you know, it's good to be able to, number one, just for general situational awareness about your environment and your community, to have an understanding of where those local repeaters are at, you know, physically. Number two, where you can reach them through your radios themselves, and really any environment that you operate in. So anywhere you go in the country, right, to kind of develop that situational awareness about that environment, whether it be, you know, just for outdoors purposes, like let's say you're going on a hike, to bring that radio with you and to practice, you know, being able to just even listen in and to see and understand where you can listen in from. But I think that that's only one part of the equation, right? I kind of see comms as up and out and down and in, right? So for the up and out, when I need to reach out to other people within the community, then I'm going to want to have awareness about those local repeaters. And then for down and in, when I'm talking about me, my business, my family, etc., personal preparedness, then I think it's important to have your own infrastructure in place. But it's a blend and a combination of both to be able to be most prepared.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is how fast some repeater networks really can be, specifically for like first responder departments. Because if it wasn't for the repeater systems that we have, none of our handhelds would work very far at all. Especially here in Kentucky, where I am, you know, south of Cincinnati, it's extremely hilly. I mean, the elevation is very extreme here. It's up and down all over the place. So regardless if you're using VHF, UHF, whatever it might be, if you're talking on like the mobile and portable side, you know, your range is already going to be limited as it is, and then you have to consider, you know, what kind of equipment am I using to begin with. So repeaters is definitely something we're looking to dive more into. But man, digital repeaters are expensive. Repeaters can be a very expensive game depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about, you know, like the handhelds and the range and the infrastructure involved and stuff like that. You know, like I'll have a lot of customers that come from a public safety background where they're using, you know, their fire radios or law enforcement and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people, you know, they might be aware of repeaters, but don't have really that appreciation just because they don't know, you know, for what actually goes into that, right? Like the linked repeater networks for public safety systems. I mean, you know, county, state, federal, like at that level, those repeater networks, there are towers all over the place. You'll never know. You'll never see them probably. But they are all, you know, linked. And that really is what provides that range and that coverage for the handhelds within that network, you know. But it's so much infrastructure that goes into that.
There is, especially if we talk to like linked repeater systems like how you're talking about. Depending on how big of an area you and your group or your preparedness group or whatever it is you're trying to speak of, if you're, let's say you're spanning a region, like you're a 3-county region, kind of like a tri-state. We'll call it a tri-state. If you're spanning a tri-state, one repeater may not do it for you, especially depending on your terrain and your elevation. So, you start talking about trying to put a repeater every 15, 20 miles, and if you're going digital or DMR or something like that, it can get pretty pricey pretty quick. You can do the analog side of it because the analog repeaters are much more affordable. But then, it's kind of the old saying, give some, gain some. If you're used to operating with encryption, and you got to give it up to gain repeater, is that worth giving up? A greater coverage space but less security, and I think that's something a lot of people got to start looking at. Is the bigger picture of the comms plan.
Yeah, and then the other thing to consider is like when you start talking about that kind of range and coverage in terms of like the planning, what is the transport look like between those two sites or however many sites that you're trying to link, right? Because then you kind of have to ride the IP network, right? Which a lot of people don't have a whole lot of faith in. You have to connect via either the internet or do some sort of satellite backhaul, or let's say for example maybe your best bet, because you're concerned about failure of the internet or something, is then just linking repeaters through a third link radio, right? Like a linking base. So it's definitely something to consider, and then adds to the cost considerably for that system.
And I'm really new to the repeater side, so I'll ask you on this. When we're talking about linking repeaters, if you want your repeaters to all act, say, on the same frequency, say I put 3 repeaters up, they're all 15 miles apart in some sort of triangle or diamond formation, whatever it is. Do you have to link those together with some sort of third-party source, or can I just set the receive and transmit to be the same for all of those repeaters and link it that way? How does that work?
So if you set those to be the same receive and transmit, that's fine, but they're not going to communicate, right? So basically, once you're within the coverage area of one repeater, you're only going to be able to reach people within that coverage area. Now, in order to properly link them, you need to tunnel that traffic through the internet, or through like I said, like that third linking base radio that's going to provide that linkage between the two, so that all the traffic is common amongst all 3 of the repeaters, as opposed to just when you're within the coverage area of one.
Gotcha. So from the preparedness aspect of it, if guys are trying to plan out their comms, they're developing their comms plan, would you say it's more indicative to link it through the internet and have a linked repeater system, or would it be better to have multiple repeaters on different frequencies and have that part of the comms plan where it's like, if you're in this area, you're in this defined region, and you set your channel to this repeater, and then if you travel, you need to set it to this repeater?
Right. So that's called roaming. When you have your handheld, and most modern handhelds do have roaming features built into them. When you're within a certain coverage area, it will select one repeater, and then you move to another coverage area, it will actually select the other repeater. But I think there's a place for both of those things, and then really to add on top of that, what I would say is HF comms, right? Like that's the answer to the long range communications. There are all these things that you kind of get into like the ham community, right, with these things. But when you're talking about like linking repeaters, probably the most affordable way to do it is through a device called an MMDVM or a DMR hotspot. So those kind of devices provide that network backhaul, so you can plug it into your router and then connect it to your repeater, and then it will tunnel that traffic through the internet. Now those devices, though, limit you to ham radio talk groups typically. There are some other ones like Shark RF, for example. They make hotspots that are basically for commercial businesses. So you could have like private talk groups on those. Now, what was I going to say here? So that's a good solution. Now, the other thing you have to consider is then how you're linking that to the internet, right? So if you don't have much faith in whatever your internet infrastructure is, let's say it's cable, maybe consider something like using a Starlink terminal, right? Is that more survivable? Depends on really what your threat model and what your preparedness, your outlook on preparedness looks like, right? What you're preparing for. Or use something like a BGAN terminal, right? So those are relatively affordable, but lower data rates and more expensive plans than Starlink. And then really, then the other answer, like I said, HF comms, I think that should be something that you absolutely invest in and practice if you want to take your preparedness seriously. Because I could, get on an HF rig and talk to somebody in Texas from here in California, or I could talk to somebody in Japan. There's no limit really to that once you understand how to operate HF comms. As I'm sure you know from your background and experience.
That was one of the coolest things as a radio operator when I was a young boot. Was like when we did a little exercise just in like the lot of our S6 shop, and we talked to Okinawa with HF, and I was like, I think it was mind blowing to me that we were able to do that.
Hell yeah.
The thing I don't understand about the civilian side, and maybe it's just because I'm too tactically minded at this point, is, what is the security answer to utilizing HF? Like if somebody were trying to develop that more wide area coverage, and linking repeaters maybe isn't the answer because, internet and all that kind of stuff. What is the answer to security when it comes to HF? Because to my knowledge, all of it is analog, is it not?
So it's not all analog. So there are digital modes for HF, and that's something that you should check out. The Tech Prepper, he's got a lot of great content on that, and the project that he's been working on, the MCOM tools. But that's digital HF communications. Now, when you're talking about like the security aspect of HF, there are HF radios that can support AES-256 encryption. And ALE modes, just like we use in the military, like 2G ALE or 3G ALE. Now, obviously, that has to be prefaced with the fact that when you're talking about like limited availability of spectrum, it's even more limited in the HF range. HF is only 3 to 30 megahertz, and there's only so few frequencies which exhibit the properties that you need to do good skywave propagation. So, if everybody starts going out and just starts talking encrypted on HF, nobody's going to be able to use it. So just understanding that, obviously in an emergency scenario, the FCC has that backstop in their rules that all rules basically go out the window, right? When life is at risk, then you have to do what you have to do to survive. So understanding that, but then just being prepared with the right equipment to be able to do that when you need to is going to be important. Now, I will say, though, that it's a serious investment if you start going down the rabbit hole of looking at secured HF communications. Like we're talking on the order of magnitude of $4,000 or $5,000 for a rig that can do that.
When you say digital HF, are you referring to what we think of as in digital and P25, or are you talking about a different digital, like more data?
So there's data modes. Yeah, and that's really primarily what digital HF is used for in the ham community. So, for example, like some modes for sending emails and, position type data, stuff like that. And really the right person to talk to about this, because I'm not so well experienced with the ham radio digital modes, but definitely the Tech Prepper, he has a lot of good content on the digital HF modes for ham radio.
Okay. Yeah, I had to get him on here too. Before my account got deleted 57 times, I used to talk to him all the time. Yeah, I don't know. I always think about the security aspect to all of it. And not necessarily just for the paranoid, like the government's evil type thing, but even like when I think of the many extremist groups that are in the U.S., left, right, doesn't really matter at this point. I see that they also are trying to develop their own capabilities and whatnot. So, that worries me at times, is even just from the preparedness aspect, is my comms being used against me in a sense. And that's what's always kind of worried me about diving into HF is, at least to me, and it may be just because I have a poor understanding of HF from this perspective versus my Marine Corps perspective, is it just seems so unsecure. Am I wrong in saying that, or?
No, I mean, it's primarily like, the average citizen is going to have, who's operating on HF, it's going to be, your ham radio type equipment, which there's no, security to that at all. It's all open, And then the other thing too, is finding the utility in HF as well. And so that's why, I don't really have a lot of and a lot of people within the community probably haven't had a lot of interest in ham type stuff because, a lot of it, like you might get on 40 meter or 20 meter band, and then you're just sitting there listening to guys just make contact all day. And there's really no utility to that in terms of preparedness, right? So finding the utility in that, once again, the Tech Prepper does a great little series. It's called No Random Contacts, right? Where he's intentionally trying to make contact with a specific call sign to really exercise his skills to be able to do that, right? Because you can shoot over somebody, you can shoot short, and, or whatever, your antenna design is not set up properly, so you're not going to be able to hit them. So, I think the utility in that is what's really most important.
This puts a lot of things into perspective, and this kind of all goes back to my thing where I was talking about, it seems like independent, self-reliant comms equipment for what you may be trying to accomplish can be limited. But radio in general is always limited. I mean, that. So there's always limitations to comms, whether it's the spectrum you're talking on, the equipment, the weather wants to be weird that day, it doesn't matter. There's always limitations. I feel like outside of the Tech Prepper and a few of his man packs, I really haven't seen anybody develop any more I haven't seen anybody develop any man packs for like the tactical environment on the civilian side, with that kind of stuff in mind. The biggest part that I struggled with to begin with, just when I'm trying to write up some designs for like the XTL 5000, was just antennas to begin with, because the XTL 5000, is all mobile based. So trying to find antennas that can handle the power, even if you scale it down to like 10 watts, from a man pack perspective, instead of being mounted to like a car roof or something, was already difficult. It was. I ended up finding, one that I think will suit the needs, but then at the same time, I don't know. I always question the comms that I'm trying to accomplish. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to accomplish something that is not accomplishable in a sense.
Right. I think that's a good point, just kind of interrogating like the purpose behind what you're doing as well. And then trying to apply the right solution, so for example, what does the man pack radio buy you? Right. So in my mind, if you man pack like a VHF or UHF, you're buying increased power output, right? And so to understand really the value that you get out of that, I think number one, you can kind of mitigate a lot of those things using handhelds by just doing the proper planning. But then, of course, just knowing that 5 watts is only going to take you so far, right? You have free space path loss, which is going to tell you, how far your radio signal will actually travel through free space. And, doing the planning, understanding those principles of radio wave propagation and free space path loss and link budget are good to help you be successful with handhelds. And then what advantage does the power give you, right? So you're talking about like a man-packable mobile radio, your power output is never going to defeat terrain, right? So that's where the planning comes into play, but it will give you range with good line of sight.
Yeah.
So that's where the value really stands for me.
My big thing with the man packs when I was, thinking of the purpose and what is it trying to accomplish was, I identified that we're on a limited budget, which means limited repeater infrastructure if we dive into repeater infrastructure. So my mindset was, if we, with proper planning and utilization, if we're utilizing a set of equipment that can already increase range through power, if we're utilizing it properly, with elevation and good line of sight, we have better chances of hitting a more scattered repeater system as it is. That was really the main reason the man packs kind of came into the thought.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point because, when you're planning for repeater systems, right, like there's a reason why a lot of repeaters max out at 50 watts output, right? Like most repeaters are designed for 50 watt output because, you have two types of systems. There's either one that's all ears or all talk, right? Like it can listen very well, or it has that sensitivity to listen very well, but or what I'm trying to say is basically like, it's only going to be as effective as far as your handhelds can reach back to it, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, if you're using mobiles in conjunction with a repeater, then you can increase that range, right? So like 50 watts output on a repeater with 5 watt handhelds is only going to get you so far, but 50 watts portables or mobiles rather with a 50 watt repeater is going to get you even further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely. The big thing I'll have to dive into now is the whole linked issue with repeaters, because I did not know you had to link your repeaters through the internet. Obviously, that within itself is a self-reliant issue as it stands, because you can't depend on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like every time I dive into comms more, I come out with more questions that I came in with.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget, you don't have to just like link over the internet. There's creative ways to do it. Like, for example, linking with that linking base mobile. It's basically like a mobile that you attach to your repeater, and then you use like 2 directional antennas pointed at each other. And if both of those sites can see each other, and you ride that third frequency as the linking base, then that's another way to do it. And some mobile radios have that functionality built in, like for example the Hytera HM782 can act as a linking base for Hytera repeaters. So it's a very powerful tool to have to build infrastructure that's still totally off grid.
Interesting. See, now more questions than I came in with.
Good.
That's the never ending game. Another big thing I find a challenge as far as equipment wise, because I feel like manuals aren't super descriptive with this kind of stuff, is trying to create things in house, like going from one radio with a certain antenna port to a different antenna with a different antenna port to achieve a certain goal, and you need different configuration pins and whatnot, and that's been another like huge part of this game, is trying to find parts to match to parts to create something.
Yeah,
because that's really all comms is just a giant game of creation.
Right. And like what I found in regards to that is like working closely with our maintainers in my unit, and like those guys are like some of the smartest people in regards to radio stuff, and they don't even know it. Like they understand power, like just to be able to provide power for your equipment is such a huge problem. And they understand, 12 volt power, 24 volt or 120, and how to be able to power equipment. They understand, the connectors, the cabling, being able to repair and replace cables and actually maintain that equipment to like that minute level, soldering skills, skills with a, a spectrum analyzer and things like that. Those guys are so smart at that stuff. And like I have in my garage just this chart that one of our maintainers made. Really good dude, super smart guy, but it basically just breaks out like all the different connectors, the frequencies that they operate best on, how much power they can handle, and all stuff like that. And I use that all the time, if I'm making like cables or making a selection about what port I want on a radio or something like that based on what frequency I'm operating.
And that's the other big thing that it took me a while to learn, is that when I was in the Marine Corps and I was a radio operator, like, I didn't truly understand comms. Like, I knew how to set up our green gear, that it would work based on the little manila folder that, you know, my gunny gave me or whatever.
Yeah.
Now I've had to learn how comms works and why, and that's been one of the biggest things I've had to learn, is what frequencies are best for what purpose, even within a single band. So like VHF, you know, understanding the lower end frequencies are better for this and the higher end are better for this, or, you know, so on and so forth. That everything has a purpose. Everything is not just blanket statement that this is comms in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up. Like, that to me is like the biggest disservice to Marines, is like coming out of the schoolhouse. I don't know about your experience, but like I felt like coming out of the schoolhouse, did I have a good understanding of RF? Absolutely not. You know, it was like some basic radio operation, and like, you know, you're going into the field and you have to make promises about what you can and can't do, and like, you know, you don't even fully really understand the principles behind what you're doing, and it's like, you know, to have that foundation can help you to be a more creative and effective radio operator. And I just feel like, you know, our Marines don't get that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it falls onto your senior leadership in your shop to like actually teach you comms, and that's if they teach you comms. You know, some NCOs and staff NCOs kind of just, you know, ride the wave and are like, all right, set this up. Like, you never truly leave understanding what the hell is going on.
Right.
Like, I felt like for the longest time, my lack of I had such a lack of knowledge that even just like the basics of, you know, the different spectrums I had written down in my notepad that I kept in my cargo pocket. Because like, I just was not learning how comms worked in a sense, that I was never remembering anything. I just remembered, set this up, plug it in, hit these buttons in this order, power it on, boom, it's good to go.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand how everything worked.
Right. Definitely. And, you know, back to the point before about maintainers, is like, I feel like those guys understood it absolutely the best.
They got rid of the maintainers, didn't they?
No.
Not
when I left. They were still around.
When did you get out?
2022, so
okay.
Recent.
I thought they got rid of one of the S6. Oh, they got rid of wire way back when.
Yeah.
Like right after I got out of the schoolhouse, they got rid of wire. That's what it was.
Yep. Yeah.
Damn wire dogs.
So to that point as well, like, you know, so now they have the 0631s, the 71s, so the data and the systems guys, networking, right? And then the 21s, obviously. But like, you know, when I was there too, like, we were trying to really, what was happening, really just kind of naturally, is like a lot of guys who are motivated or whatever, we're going to basically cross train between 21 and 31 type stuff. So to me, like, I see like radio, I think it's so important for people to have a good understanding of radio and networking as well, you know, because that the combination of skills between radio and networking is so important. Like, to be able to take a radio and then to provide like an IP network over that system, you just unlock so much capability. So I think that really understanding the networking is huge, and being able to cross train in both of those skills is very important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of goes even to hit back onto the civilian side, is diversifying your comms knowledge. And kind of like what we talked about earlier, is diversifying your equipment and to be truly proficient in comms, not to show bias to any one system or mode or frequency band and so on and so forth. Now, you are kind of somewhat limited in the frequency band, specifically from the civilian use, and I don't know what your stance on it is as far as compliance to FCC rules and whatnot. And for everybody listening, no, I'm not telling you to break or follow FCC rules. Those are your own personal decisions, but know that there are consequences sometimes to decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You are kind of limited, because so much of like the 700 and 800 bands and above is like for like first responder networks. The HF band, like we talked about, is only 3 to 30 megahertz. So you're kind of stuck in a box in a sense, and you kind of got to figure it out from there, depending on what you're trying to do. Again, I guess this all goes back to, what are you trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
If you're just trying to make contact with other various people in your area, and what you're doing is not sensitive at all, and you're not worried about giving out any type of information, you're just kind of a ham radio guy, then yeah, none of this is really of concern to you. So yeah, it really all comes down to what you're trying to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that, we're stuck in a box in a sense, but also, there's so much that we do have access to be able to utilize as just everyday citizens, whether it be unlicensed frequency bands, ham radio bands, or let's say you're a business owner. I think that really a lot of the power and capability is unlocked for business owners and those people who are part of those networks. Like, make radio a significant part of the effort in your business, like implementing those things, because that Part 90 license can give you access to be able to use a lot of different things like encryption and systems that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do in ham radio, with your network within your business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do have access to a lot of stuff that people don't fully appreciate, right? Like being able to get the most capability out of what you have available to you, I think is awesome. Like until you've reached that absolute like ceiling, then you should still keep trying to learn more about it. I'm still learning more every day. Like, there's so much that we can do within that box. And then, eventually, right, like until the situation necessitates it, then you can go outside the box, right? Like when the FCC says an emergency or whatever. But, I think that we can definitely do a lot with what we have available.
Does the HF side have a voice digital mode, or is that all still analog?
So there are some like digital vocoders for HF. So for example, like when you're talking about the encryption modules, right, for HF radios, talking about like high dollar, big investment type stuff, they basically all work by converting your analog voice signal into a digital voice signal, and then doing like an ALE or something like that, like an ALE modem. And then it will encrypt that digital voice signal. So go ahead.
What did you call it? A digital vocoder?
Yep.
Vocoder. I'm looking this up because I want to like see what I'm looking at as you explain it. Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. But yeah, so that's how, they operate. And really that is digital voice with HF. I'm trying to think of if there's a digital voice mode for like ham radio, and it's like escaping me right now. But yeah, I don't think there is. I think it's mostly like, because yeah, if I'm ever on like ham bands or anything like that, it's all AM single sideband.
I see the word codon a lot, or codane.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Yep. So Codan is a manufacturer that really does like military grade transceivers, and I believe they're based out of Australia, but they resource a lot of militaries worldwide, with HF equipment.
These digital HF radios are expensive.
Sure are.
Very expensive. Although, that's AliExpress. I don't want to mess with that. How much? So these vocoders, are they a larger device on itself, or is it something much smaller that you utilize with your analog radio?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things you can do, right? So there's inline encryptors, like inline digital vocoders, which basically plug into the audio port of your radio and then go between like your handset and your audio port. And that will digitize your audio before it gets to the radio, and then it will transmit it over that wave, right? And then there's, just chips that you can install like in a radio. Like, for example, ICOM has a HF radio, the F8101, and there is a chip that actually lives, on the motherboard of that radio that does the same thing.
Interesting. See, this is what I'm talking about. You come in with a question, you could leave with so many more questions.
Yeah.
Because now I'm questioning my whole VHF Manpack prototype. Because there's probably
I think it's a great thing to explore.
The vocoder or the VHF Manpack?
VHF, still definitely. Manpack, yeah.
I guess really the big thing with that is the limited range. Because obviously you want your Manpack to be, that extended arm of comm.
Mm-hmm.
And VHF is already line of sight as it is. So if you're not working with a repeater network, it may not work to how you may want it to.
Right. Well, I think there's, it's like a weapon target match thing, right? So like there's certain, with certain weapon systems, you're going to be able to range certain distances. And so, like for example, your AR-15 or M16, right? Like 500 yards, 880 to a area target, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're going to want to step up to the next system that can be able to range that next threat, right? And then there's systems that you wouldn't try that have longer range, but you wouldn't try to range a closer threat, right? If that makes sense. So I think everything has its place, right? Like the handheld has its place, the VHF mobile radio, whether it's Manpack in a vehicle, that has its place for what you're trying to achieve. The HF rig, that's a separate thing entirely. So, I don't think, you need to abandon anything, but explore all these options and then apply the appropriate solution where it kind of sees fit.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely hit you up offline because I definitely have more questions about especially the HF side of all this.
Yeah.
One of the other big talking points I kind of wanted to get to was just general tips for those that are trying to be, the RTO of their group, whether it's a preparedness group, whether it's like a community-based group, whether it's a family of like-minded, members and whatnot. What are some good tips and advice you would give to people taking on the RTO role?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some good tips for people taking on the RTO role. That's a great question. So I would say, number one, be an advocate for communications. Number two, this is a tough question because there's so many widely varying situations that somebody can be employed in. Sure. But in the most general way to kind of approach this, I would say, be an advocate for really number one, self-education, right? So you're going to have to really invest in educating yourself about these things and then sharing that information and education with the people around you. So that's one thing, in my courses, right, I can't teach every single person in this world. It's just not feasible. But what I like to do is the person coming to my course, I tell them, to take the material home, right? There's nothing, proprietary about it. Take it home. Thank you for coming here. Take it home to the people that you care about and share this information and knowledge with them. So I think education is super important. Number two is to be an advocate, because once you start to understand the value that radio skills and knowledge can provide to you, then, you can understand how that impacts certain situations and scenarios where you might see yourself employing that and how that can be effective for others. So it's your responsibility to be an advocate to help make other people assets to the team as well. Mm-hmm. Investment, in the equipment, I think understanding capabilities and limitations of equipment and how you would employ those is important as well. And then investing in the skills and knowledge outside of just handheld radios or mobile radios, there's so much outside of that I'm sure you can attest to from being an RTO as well as being prepared, understanding planning, right? Being prepared with your equipment in terms of maintaining that equipment, right? SL3s, right? We did that stuff. Mm-hmm. SL3s and op checks, PCCs and PCIs, developing TTPs for your family, your team, etc. And then like I did a video right recently. I don't think it got that many views because it's not like the sexier part of radio comms, but like developing a radio team kit, right? That's one aspect of it, is like being resourced with the tools and equipment to be able to succeed, in the field, right? So like that's one aspect of things. But yeah, I think those are some tips that I would probably leave somebody with, and there's probably a million more things that I'm just not thinking of right now, but I think that's probably a good start.
Is your very first point, which was, if I remember correctly, it was be an advocate for education, and you brought up take-home material and whatnot. We do the same thing for the company ECT for our medical classes, is we send everybody home with a laminated front and back guide to March, and we specifically tell people in the class, take this home to your family and whatnot, and just go over with them what you learned here today, and buy a little trainer medical kit and do March on each other at your house. And I think that's awesome, because take-home material is super beneficial, because looking things up on the internet is one thing and reading through articles and all that kind of stuff, but actually holding something in your hands that an instructor gave you, it's almost like there's a direct tie to that moment, that memory that they were talking about what you're reading on that paper. And it like creates that stronger essence of remembrance and whatnot.
Yeah.
When I was on Civil Sentinel's podcast last week, we talked about this as well. And my biggest thing I think I said for RTOs was, whether it's self-taught or you learned it from like a professional standpoint that you were in at one point in time, was understanding how to write and manage a communications plan. And like you said, that goes way past handheld and portable radios. You're talking about what frequency bands you're using, how we're going to utilize it, how often are we changing over, what frequencies we may be on, what encryption are we using, so on and so forth. So being able to understand the many in-depth parts of a communications plan is super important, just at the very basic role, at the very basic standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to bring up something as well that you mentioned, kind of just as you were starting this line of thinking, was you said to like resource them or students, right, with the like that printout, right, that laminated printout for March. But then you also said to tell them to practice that, and I think that's so important as well. And I would add that to the list of things that I would recommend for people, is to come up with scenarios that you can put into practice, like to actually exercise your equipment with those people, get them involved, get them interested, and practice those skills in like a field setting, in a practical environment. I think that's so important as well.
PracGap is huge. Regardless of what it is, comms, medical, so on and so forth. And my guys, like how I talked about earlier, this little training exercise we did recently with all my local guys, actually practicing putting every single individual through the role of the RTO team, because we did a buddy pair on the RTO table at a time. Getting everybody that practice and putting them through it and whatnot builds not only the knowledge and the skills to be able to perform those roles if they need to do it, but also an appreciation for those that are performing those roles. Because not everybody, it's like the old saying, not everybody can be a door kicker, not everybody can be the medic, not everybody can be the comms officer. There are specialities that people have to take to become a well-minded, group of individuals, whether that's friends, family, whatever it is. But having that baseline understanding is super important.
Definitely.
Well, Alex, we've covered a lot. The comms episodes, I try not to make too long, because this is a lot of information for people to hold on to.
Definitely. Yeah, it goes deep.
It goes deep. There's really no end to comms. We could talk about different comm stuff for hours and hours, probably.
Yeah.
What are the best ways people can find you? You and I guess Mojave Repeater more specifically.
Yeah, so I'm most prominent on Instagram, I guess, but really what I've been trying to invest in limited time in a day, but I'm trying to put out more video content on YouTube because I really want to be able to, provide that skills and knowledge to a wider audience. I want people to benefit from it. So I'm trying to put together valuable content on YouTube, obviously totally free for people to go enjoy and watch, and hopefully they take away something that can be valuable to them for their personal preparedness, for themselves, their family, etc. So please, to the audience, I encourage you to follow on YouTube and check out the videos, and let me know what you want to see as well. Like I'm open to, I read for my audience, obviously leave comments and stuff like that. And, I'm definitely open to hearing your thoughts on what you want to see in YouTube content.
Awesome. Do you guys have any upcoming classes that the West Coast guys should be aware of?
Yeah. So let's see here. So the next West Coast class is going to be April. Let's see. I'll just pull up the calendar real quick. So West Coast is going to be April 15th and 16th in the Hollister, California area. That one's going to be pretty cool because it's at this off-grid ranch location where there's lodging available, or camping if you prefer to do that. But we stay for the whole weekend and we just nerd out on comm stuff. So it's April 15th, 16th in the West Coast. Going to Alaska, May 13th and 14th. There's still a few seats left for that one, which is, I guess, technically West Coast. I don't know. May 20th and 21st at Core Vision in Bremerton, Washington. And then beyond that, I think they're further East Coast courses.
Okay. So you guys do make it out here to the East Coast too? Yeah.
So I'll be in Ohio June 10th and 11th, which is kind of East Coast.
Oh, really? Wait a minute. Hold up. What city are you going to be in?
Cleveland.
Wait, damn, you way up there. You said May 10th and 11th? Or
yeah, I believe that was May 10th and 11th.
A Wednesday, Thursday?
No, that must be wrong. June 10th and 11th, sorry.
See, June 10th and 11th. Okay. Interesting. I got some buddies up there that are getting new into comm stuff, and I'm actually setting them up with some digital handhelds right now. So I'll pass that along to them. They're up there in the Toledo area. I'm sure there'll be a few of them that are interested in that.
Awesome.
Well, Alex, I really appreciate you coming on. This is really our first time we've really talked outside of a few Instagram chats. But this was fun. I'm glad I was able to get you on. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad to nerd out on comms anytime.
Awesome. I'll definitely be hitting you up privately because I'll have some more of those HF questions.
Cool. Sounds good, man.
All right. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, of course.
All right, guys, that's all I got for episode 20, Conversations and Communications. As always, guys, train hard, train often.
Tell me turn it down and I'ma only turn up louder. Call me what you wanna, but you can't call me no coward. Strength in numbers, we the people, still the ones with power. Fighting fire with fire, time to take back what is ours. Tell me